leasing. I inherited it from my partner, of course. I don't know if I started leasing it, but it's where some of our offices, Title EQ, are in Philadelphia. And through that time and through this experience, gotten to know you a little bit, both as a friend, as a client, and as the owner and developer of this building called the Billy Penn Studios. And we're talking about deal stories here. I've got a million stories in real estate. Somebody's, there's always some crazy event that's taken place in real estate, some crazy deal that people were after. And, the seller was, out of the country, and then they went to jail, and then there was some fraud thing, and they almost didn't get the deal, and then whatever. And then they got it, and it turned out to be a success or a failure for that matter. Those things happen all the time too. But there's great stories in this business, as good as any, I think, in business stories, in real estate, in commercial real estate. And I've heard your story. I've heard the short version of your story. I've heard the long version of your story. I've heard you tell others, and I've been in the room. And in my opinion, you've got one of the best deal stories. And it's not usually these deal stories are like, this is what happened over a few week or a few month or even a year period of time. But yours has lasted. It's almost your life story. That building almost encompasses, at least works in parallel sort of with your life story, as it's gone back quite a bit. And there's been a lot of interweaving. So I heard you tell it to an audience once. It was a phenomenal story. And I know you told it impromptu, but you did it, you told it really well, and it's a great story. And so I want to pull what I can out of you today and talk about this story of the Billy Penn Studios on North 5th Street in, did they call it Old Kensington? Is that where we are?
They do now, yes.
Okay. It's old with an E.
Correct.
Old E Kensington, right? The old timey version of that. So in Old Kensington section of Philadelphia, not too far away from Fishtown, not too far away from Northern Liberties. So I hope that was enough of a setup, but tell me a little bit about this building, how it came about. Go ahead. Where do you want to start with this?
Sure. So let me just back up, and, I appreciate the fact that the building itself is a big part of my life and has been for an extended period of time now. But that being said, there was some sort of a foundational interest in real estate, as I am a third generation real estate investor, speculator. And I ended up being that as by default, not by design. I wanted to be a civil engineer and build mass transportation systems and bridges and the like. And after a few semesters at Drexel University, I was struggling, academically, socially. I was having a wonderful time. And I decided to switch gears and go to the path that was laid out through my familial business, which was real estate investment. And I switched and went to Temple University and then began buying and selling my own properties. And by the time the Billy Penn building came around, maybe I had bought and sold hundreds and hundreds of properties. I did 110 flips in the year 2000, for example, before flipping was exactly what people even had the word flipping.
For wholesale
speculation. It was just, we were trading in distressed real estate. Yeah. We did a lot of owner financing. And, I don't have much forethought. I visited Northern Liberties probably in the late 80s, early 90s, where every third property was renovated and there was still a lot of blight and vacant land. And I shied away from it and told a friend, this is never going to take off. But then later in life, after attending the sheriff's sale for years and years to acquire inventory, I decided to start investing in vacant ground, which was just north of Girard Avenue, which was the geographic boundary on the north side for Northern Liberties, and just west of 5th Street, which was the western boundary of Northern Liberties. So I was in that quadrant where Billy Penn happens to be, and I had a bunch of lots. And those lots really propelled me to believe in Billy Penn back in 2013, because I had bought those lots around 2007, and I'm talking about maybe 20 to 25 vacant lots for between $7,000 to $12,000 each, maybe 15 by 50 on average. And by the time 2013 rolled around, I'd finally begun to be able to sell them, because in the interim, the market had turned. 2008 happened. I couldn't give them away. I was paying taxes, stormwater bills, insurance in some cases, and the holding costs were just, and it was just like a mark on my balance sheet.
No dirt moved from 08 to 2000.
I didn't know what was going to happen. And then finally I sold the first one, I think in around 2010, 11, and I got maybe 20 grand and I was elated. And then by the time I sold the last one, I got 40,000 for it, and I was, doing cartwheels. And now those lots are probably worth, $140,000 each.
Yeah.
So I didn't wait long enough, but I did see I had the vision to see that the neighborhood where Billy Penn Studios was could be something. So then, as you inherited your office, this is not a deal story to the extent I didn't beg, borrow, and steal to make the acquisition occur. I inherited it, just like
Right.
you inherited your office.
Right.
You know,
And I want to take a detour, a very, very short and quick detour to jump ahead of, to explain to people who don't know what this building looks like, because they're not in the space, right? It's not like we're showing them the space. And I've heard you give this conversation in the space and you can see it with your eyes. And then we go back to like kind of how it got there. It's, what is it, 150,000 square feet?
170,000 square foot.
Okay.
It was an aluminum manufacturing facility where they created products for building, namely gutters, soffit, fascia, downspout, anything you could think of that went usually on the exterior of a building that related to was made out of aluminum. And they had not only the building, which I own, they had maybe 4 to 5 total buildings in the neighborhood and a lot of holdings within a 3-block radius of where the building sits. So
one of those spaces where you walk in that almost every single time people are unfamiliar with it and they come to meet me for a conference, for a real estate settlement, for whatever it is. They walk in the door, and I remember the first time I walked in the door, it's an impressive space when you walk in, the way the lobby's laid out, the common area. There's a nice cafe in the lobby, the double height as you walk in, the glass bridge. There's factory kind of industrial modern kind of elements to it all over the place. The atrium, like it's got a lot of cool spaces, not to mention the conference spaces and the event spaces, but even just when you walk in, glass doors, it's a very, very impressive space. And it's a surprise. People don't expect to see it when they come in off the street. It just looks like a plain brick building and you're in a neighborhood. Okay, it's fine. Then you walk in and you're like, wow, this is, and I've gotten that over and over again from people. So just to give a little flavor of kind of like, this is a notable building, I think, definitely in this neighborhood for sure, north of Girard, and it's not quite east of Fifth, but from now pushing west of Fifth in that part of town, it's a very notable building. Go ahead. I didn't mean to detour you.
No, not at all.
Yeah.
So day one, Dad died, and there was a contentious battle over his estate, despite the fact that I was the only heir.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't want to have things fall into my lap and created roadblocks to prevent them from coming to my lap, and even made it more difficult than I anticipated.
And this was his building. You skipped that part.
Yeah, he had a partner.
Mm-hmm.
So what initially, to go back to the granular level of the deal itself, when it occurred, when my father acquired the property, PNC Bank had a bunch of defaulted loans on the Billy Penn portfolio because when the aluminum business went down, they relocated or sold, their numbers were way off, and the buildings were, struggling financially as well as the company. And consequently, the bank sold the bad paper to my father. So he started by owning the mortgages on the property.
Got it.
And then there was some guy puttering around the building who was renting space at a very cheap amount monthly for whatever you wanted to store there, like a self-storage unit, but very, very rudimentary.
Mm-hmm.
You would put up a chain link fence within a big swath of open warehouse space to store your goods, whatever they were, and pay $1 a foot.
So he was just subleasing this to little pieces.
Yes.
Right.
So, and he also maybe had his own business. I can't remember, but my father ended up evicting him, and then he took over the building, and with a partner started to continue that business model and rent space to try to support the holding costs while the foreclosure was going on. Because remember, he just owned the mortgage. He did not own the deed.
Right.
So ultimately he foreclosed, he got the deed, and the building languished for 5 to 7 years. They just kind of did what they could. And at one point, my father had maybe $500,000 of his own money invested in, Scotch tape and Band-Aids to keep the building together, and was able to refinance and pull out his investment. And after that, it got worse because now he was unwilling to do it again because he had such a difficult time recouping his investment initially. And then ultimately he passed in 2013. Late 2013, I finally got control of the building, and now I have this albatross. And there was other assets that came with the estate that were better than this. But I was toying with whether or not to make a run at the building because of my experience with the lots. The neighborhood was turning. It seemed to be getting better. There was no writing on the wall that guaranteed it, but it seemed like a good idea. So then the next step was, well, how am I going to do this? And what are my obstacles? And beside the obstacle of finding a viable group of people to fund it and build it, there was title problems that existed. There were hundreds of thousands of dollars in real estate taxes that were owed, water bills, leaking roof, elevators that didn't work. People had goods stored on upper floors that couldn't get them down because of the broken elevators. trash strewn in every corner, no windows, very difficult to navigate the interior of the building. So it was pretty much unusable except for maybe a portion of the first floor. And there was some maker type spaces in there and artists in there were doing welding and they were having raves on the weekend and we didn't have proper insurance.
Right.
It was a harrowing experience initially. So I chose carefully from the amount of investors, developers, and builders that I met over the years of being in the real estate industry who would help me or be able to accomplish the renovation. And I assembled a team of myself and 3 others. I found the one guy who was the developer, and then he found 2 other money guys, and coincidentally, they're all Israeli, and they were all friendly. And we started to invest our own funds to stabilize the building. I bought out my father's partner, so I wholly owned the property, and then began to solve the immediate issues, which were the roof leaks and the tax deficit. And it was, a $20,000 per month payment for over a year to solve the real estate tax problem. But because of going to the tax sale for 20 years, I knew the people in the law department, and they were friendly with me and trusted me to make and pay the agreement that they gave me. And we cleared up the title and we began the course of renovations to the property to make it what it is today. But that being said, that was just the beginning, and it was a 7-year process to get it to where it is today.
Neighborhood still wasn't in question during all this stuff. There was by far no guarantee or the risk was layered. There was a lot of risks involved in this thing as you went through. Not only
things were moving in the right direction. Maybe a single family house was worth $200,000, $250,000, whereas today it's probably worth $400,000 to $500,000. And we ended up building new homes behind the building ultimately. But in order to renovate the building, once I've assembled this team, then it became like, think about it, you have a rectangular box now, and you're going to build offices. Well, how many offices? Where are the common corridors? What's the design? What's the lighting going to be like? And all these things that I was a neophyte at and never even thought about because I was used to doing speculation of much smaller properties by myself for just a resale to home buyers. And the bills and the budgetary requirements for design and architecture and lighting design, and these were foreign to me, and I kept cringing like, it's going to cost how much to do what? And that being said, I didn't realize at the time that we were building such a wow factor, and I'd never built something that created such a wow factor. And it took months and months and months to cobble together the permits and the funding, and then we became at a loss for revenue that would support a loan necessary to fix the whole building. So then we now have a stabilized structure. We all have a tremendous amount of personal capital invested in the progress that we made thus far. But every banker that came through, and we did about 40 horse and pony shows with different lenders, and they loved it. They saw the promise in the neighborhood and the building, but they weren't able to paper it. They didn't know how to get their head and hands around the numbers to create a loan document that would make their board happy. And then ultimately it was a catch-22. Well, you need more income. Well, we need more money to build more spaces to make more income. And we started with the swath of storefronts along Fifth Street. There's about 6 or 7 of them. And we were able to build them, and they're self-contained. They have their own bathrooms. They have their own exit to the street level. And they began to pay rent, and that supported a piece of a loan that was funded by a local bank that was more like a line of credit combination and construction loans. So we had to reach certain milestones through the development in order to get the next tranche of funding. And that being said, the first $1 million was very difficult to attain. And then the multiple millions required to finish it were not. So once the ball started to roll, the new bank came and took the first bank out before we were even done taking all the money that they had promised us for the construction loan. And they refinanced the entire building and gave us all the money that we needed to finish it. And by the way, this was in the height of COVID. I mean, April of 2020.
I don't know if I realized it was that recent. I thought it was.
That was when we got our final piece of funding. And I remember I was on the phone with the chief financial officer and the board members in an empty, office building because no one was coming to work at the time.
Right.
We were about 75% complete. Leasing was going okay. And they asked me, what do you have to tell us that's going to make us believe that the building's going to continue to go in the right direction, in a positive direction, and you'll be able to repay this loan and the tens of thousands of dollars per month that is required under the payment covenant of this loan. And I just went on to a diatribe about, how I believed in the building and that, I had done other properties in 2008 when the market had turned, and that building was different than this building because it was a smaller building, but it was an industrial building that was converted to offices ultimately that had originally been penciled to become condos. And the condo market cratered. We already had the money from the bank.
Right.
And we switched gears because we had the funding and we made it into what Billy Penn Studios is today. And it survived through the downturn of the market in the commercial spaces. Maybe the market didn't turn as quickly, if you remember, as the residential market. So that momentum continued through the downturn of the 2008 era. And we were able to fix the building and rent the building and make money. And I just said that, I couldn't believe how difficult it was, because with a cookie cutter model, when you're getting a piece of ground and you want to build 50 houses and there's hundreds of houses in a quarter-mile radius of that parcel that sold for a certain amount, it's very easy for the bank to make the connection of the dots to say, we're going to give you this much money, you're going to build a house for that much money, and it's going to sell for this final figure, and we'll be able to get repaid. But when you tell them with commercial, you're going to give us this much money, we're going to fix this big building, and we're going to rent these spaces to offices, and we're going to earn this kind of income, they don't have the same foresight, or they don't want to have it. They don't believe as much in commercial as they do in residential.
Yeah, I have my thing with bankers is, first of all, in buildings that anything that's not cookie cutter, like you say, anything that's not single family, or a space like we're in right now, for example, this building, which people can't see, but it's similar. It's broken up office spaces in an old industrial space. The bespoke nature of all the players you need to come together to make that work. The lenders and banks make risk decisions. They make decisions about who they want to invest in. It's an investment. So it really is kind of a partnership. But banks also, while you need these banks to do this, because that's what they do, and you need money, and that's where the money comes from, they don't have the same risk tolerance that, a developer, an entrepreneur, somebody's going to have, who's going to go out and find the project and have the vision. They need guarantees. They've got, there's a different bar there, right? A different measurement that they have to hold themselves up to, and they're different human beings. And so I find that all the time, but it's crazy that the bespoke nature of it's, this is what we do. This is what we lend on. Not really. They make they just make business decisions every single time, independently of the other times.
Yeah. The commercial lending department of a major financial institution, namely a bank, is set up just for that purpose. But it's not as cookie cutter as residential. It was astounding to me that everybody loved it, but nobody could figure out how to do it.
Yeah.
And we went through periods of not only writing checks personally and hard money loans, and it was a scary proposition. And I'm not jumping up and running out tomorrow to do the next big building because I don't have this voracious appetite as some of my fellow investors and partners do. But I also credit them with not only helping to get the development done, but they're more of a visionary. I play checkers, they play chess. And I'm the face of the building, and I'm the front man and the politician most of the time. But I can't take any credit away from them, because without the partnership of all four of us, it would have never worked. And the level of trust between us is paramount. In that, the first year or two, they weren't even on the paperwork for the building, and they were writing checks, and we didn't even have any type of a partnership agreement or a note from me to them.
Right.
And
handshakes.
And these, they're not inherently trusting people. But I found the guy, and then he found his dear friends, and
how did it come to be that people that weren't inherently trusting people, in your description, shook your hand and started writing checks when they didn't really have recourse at that moment?
Because the three of them have an alliance.
They have, okay.
Yeah, and they one guy gave me the pass and the other
Right.
two
They
fell into
accepted that
place.
thing,
And
yeah.
since that time, we've become great friends.
Yeah.
And it's continued to be a great working relationship and friendship
Yeah.
on an ongoing basis. And then I also wanted to touch, now that we've stabilized the building, we started the construction, we've gotten the money, now we have to fill it. And that was another, do you want to give it to a commercial brokerage and let them, do their thing? And we chose to do it in-house and hire a guy who was not the commercial leasing guy. He was a guy who learned how to be a commercial leasing guy. And to his credit, he did it all.
Right.
And, all these pieces of the puzzle are one's just as important as the next. And even today, when commercial office buildings are not doing historically well, and everybody's trying to convert to residential, knock wood, we're 95% occupied.
Yeah.
And then I try to sit back and think about, well, why is that? What's the reason for the success of the building itself based on the market not being great right now? And I've tied it to a few key things. And I believe that the main thing is, well, we have parking. So that's huge.
It is huge.
The fact that you can pull up and then find a place to put
I don't
your
think
car.
that's the only reason. I want to hear the
And
rest of
by the same token, when the renovation of the building occurred and the gentrification of the area happened simultaneously, which was crazy. Like, we couldn't have picked a better area to do it at a better time. So my crystal ball was not working that well, and it just happened that way. I won't take the credit for that for sure. But parking evaporated overnight.
Yeah.
We could literally have tumbleweeds on the street, and you could park at any one of the four corners of the building on any of the streets without a problem. And then it just seemed like overnight you couldn't find a spot to put your car, and we were forced to clean up the lot to the point where we could park more cars on it because we had the need.
Yeah.
And that's a big key to the success of the building, is having the parking. We're not in the center of the city, so it's not a tremendous amount of density, although it's way more dense than it was when we started. And you can kind of get in and get out without rush hour traffic being that much of a factor.
Close to the bridge. It's close to New Jersey. It's close to Center City. The proximity is really strong.
Yeah, the location is
95.
great. And when we were looking at it, like you said, we're just north of Northern Liberties, just west of Fishtown, and just east of Temple University. So we were nestled in an area that if you're using a forecasting tool, there's no choice, but they would engulf that area, and they have. And then ultimately, we're on site every day.
I was just going to say, I was waiting for you to say that, because that's, from my perspective, you're right. All these attributes that the building has, and its proximity, its location, the parking, all that stuff is all true. But there's zero chance that the building would be as successful as it is if you weren't on site. If you had some hired management and you were in a tower somewhere else, no way.
We've had people come to us and say they manage huge buildings like ours remotely, and they don't even have anybody staffing on site on a daily basis. And after the leasing guy started to do his thing. So when it started in the beginning, in its infancy, I was the leasing guy. I was the property manager. I basically, and my partner did all the development and construction. He had his own crew. And then we grew to a point where we hired the leasing guy. And then we grew to the point where we hired a property manager, because now you have to have somebody who has a relationship with the tenants and helps with collections. And that being said, we also always had a bookkeeper behind the scenes. But because we're there every day and we're seeing things in real time, and we have our own staff of people to do repairs, although we also have a good cast of subcontractors too. We try to be as responsive as possible. And you're just not going to achieve that level of service or even cleanliness. The building we try to keep it as clean as possible. We have 3 full-time cleaning girls. We spend 6 figures a year just to have them keep it, because as beautiful as it is, if you don't maintain it, it's still not going to have the allure that it does now. So those 3 things, parking, location, and then on-site ownership and management, I think are the keys to our success. And we've also had to switch gears. The market isn't what the market was, meaning people don't want big office spaces anymore. How big is your office?
I think it's 600 or 700 square feet, something like that.
Right. And you run a large title company out of a
we have
small
multiple
space.
offices in different places.
People
and that's
still
kind of
work
our
remotely. Yeah,
way
they
that
don't
we do
need
it. But yeah.
So to that end, we have co-working space. We have reinvented some of the bigger spaces in the building to smaller spaces. And we found a niche in beauty suites, wherein you give a 10-foot by 12-foot office with a sink in it, and you'll take all comers from estheticians, masseuses, hair, nails,
Yeah.
and on and on and on. We have 44 of them carved into maybe 6,000 square feet of space that we were unable to re-rent. We had it rented, and he never moved in. He paid his rent for 2 years, and he bought himself out of the lease, and we had this big empty space, and we repurposed it. So you have to be able to adjust to the market and do the things that you can.
I think that's a great idea. That's a great one. Yeah, for sure.
And back to the renovation, so now we have this big rectangular box, and you want to create those corridors, and you want light and air in the middle. And we have the 3 platforms, or 4. We have the beauty suites, the co-working, the event space, and the office space, where to put what, how big to make it. And you can design it how you envision it. But if you wanted 1,600 square feet, and we had to break the wall between your space and next door, even though on the plan when we built it, it was so many space. So you never know how many spaces you're really going to have until you start to fill the building.
Yeah, of course.
And you don't want to put 2 uses that are diametrically opposed next to each other, like the Christian reading room next to the rock studio. And to that end, we had to choose the type of office and retail spaces that we wanted, because we didn't want to have maker spaces where people did a heavy woodworking or sculpting or painting that created fumes, dust, or dirt that would impact the accountant next door.
And all this stuff is stuff that if you weren't on site, you would not be able to do. There's no way you'd be able to understand your building as well as you do, right? And know the tenants also as well as you do, and kind of sell them also on, we can fix this, we can make this what you need to make. And a challenge that doesn't exist in multifamily. Obviously, it doesn't exist in probably most other asset classes or many other asset classes, but definitely not, multifamily or more.
But think about it. If you have a great applicant that's well qualified financially, but it's not a use that you really you want, and you have empty space and a banknote to pay, it's a tough call.
Sure.
When do you push the limit, and when do you not push the limit?
Didn't you have a Taekwondo studio in there or something? And it was a problem.
Yeah, that's a great story. So there's a quick story you'll like. So early on, we had a huge space on the 3rd floor that an owner of a Taekwondo studio came to us and said that, he thought it would be amazing. He'd do a world-class Taekwondo studio there. And aside from the logistics of getting the students in and out of the office building, it was such a big space. Again, it became the money versus logistics, and we figured out a way to solve it because it was a big rent check. It was a 5-figure monthly rent.
Yeah.
So I said, but you're going to be doing takedowns and Taekwondo on the 3rd floor. Isn't that going to impact the tenants beneath? And he swore up and down he had a quote unquote world-class mat system that was new, and it was sound deadening, and we weren't going to hear a thing down below, and it was going to be, rainbows and butterflies. It was like a stampede of steer. And he was dropping kettlebells and doing takedowns. And, he almost had to take me down because I would say to him, you please reserve these types of till after 5. You don't need to do it in the middle of the day if you're doing.
But that's hard for him. He's got a business to run, and that wasn't part of the deal.
Right.
So,
And we went back and forth, and I couldn't rent the spaces beneath his studio because it got so bad. I ended up taking those spaces for my office.
Right.
And I jumped on the grenade, and I said, well, since I made the problem, I'm going to live with the problem. And, try to keep it in check, because I'll be underneath, and every time I hear the takedown, I'll run upstairs and try to see if we can't mitigate it. So through COVID, he didn't do well because nobody could come in.
Sure.
Luckily, he had a co-signer, and he was able to give us a good portion of the remainder of the rent, and we were happy to see him go. But that space was 10,000 square feet. And to this day, probably 4,000 of it still sits vacant, and we're repurposing it as we speak. And we've come up with a new design and a new plan, which you were even looking at. But we took the locker rooms and the administrative offices for that suite and made it into the beauty suite. So that was
I didn't realize that.
Yeah, that was a repurpose. Bless you.
Thank you.
But yeah, so that was a funny tenant story, and we've had people we've suspected were sleeping in the building in their unit where you're not allowed to do that, and we try to police that. And they would swear up and down that the couch wasn't their bed for the night. People who needed to utilize the restrooms as bathing facilities for bird baths in the morning, and so you still have to
keep craziness.
Yeah, and we've got a new entry system, that the butterfly system, that allows people in and out and passcodes. Because with everybody on the beauty suites in the third floor of the building, they used to have to come downstairs to let their customers in, and now they can access them remotely through their cell phones. And so it's constantly a learning process. And then, once we got to the point where the building was stabilized and rented out, and the co-working spaces were created. The co-working didn't do that well, even with the failure we weren't inundated with applications. And just recently we're
still operating though, still running.
Yeah. We're at about 75% occupancy in the co-working space now. That was maybe 15,000 square feet. We chopped it down to like just under 10.
Okay.
Because part of it had its own entrance, and that was possibly another storefront, and we had somebody who wanted the storefront, so we gave it to them. We reduced the size of the co-working space, and now they have to come through the lobby of the building to get to there. So the co-working space is doing better. And the final frontier for the development of the building was the event spaces.
Yeah, the event business, which is a whole other business almost.
Yeah, back to diametrically opposed. Now you're going to have a bar mitzvah in the middle of a commercial building where people are trying to run their businesses. But everybody's lease has this clause that says after certain hours, be aware that it could get a little noisy. But we haven't had many complaints at all about noise and bleed of sound from the event spaces into the office spaces. In fact, during WrestleMania, we had a full-blown 7 card wrestling match, 7 matches of wrestling in one of the event spaces. And the luchateros were there. They were jumping off the top rope and doing backflips. And
during the day, in the
middle of the day. And we brought the tenant base on board by inviting them to this paid event for free.
Which I was out of town and I missed, and I'm sorry that I did.
You could stand on the second floor and look down onto and have the best seat in the house for free if you're a tenant. And they loved it. It was amazing. We were really biting our nails about, how badly are we shooting ourselves in the foot with our tenant base by having this wrestling match in the middle of a weekday? Right. It was a Thursday afternoon, and it went great.
Yeah, it worked out.
Yeah. So we're like, again, being on site and trying to manage it. So now we've evolved to the point where our latest addition to our team is an events manager who just does the event booking. Everything from conference room rentals to outside businesses to the lounge, VIP suite, event spaces, and the like, and the atrium and the lobby. It's all available for events after hours and on weekends.
And the event planning business is a whole different business and a whole different industry than running
another
space
huge learning curve.
Yeah, I mean, that's a different thing.
One of the things my father, instilled upon me is that he never, and consequently by default, I never wanted to be in the hospitality industry.
Right.
I didn't want anything to do with owning a restaurant. I didn't want anything to do with owning a bar because it's so fickle. And I see that you're only as good as your last meal or your last drink or, what's in vogue and what's not. And you could go in and out of grace very quickly in those types of industries. But I fooled myself with the event space rental business in saying that I'm just renting a vanilla box. Whatever party you want to put on is whatever party you want to put on. And I have nothing to do with it. But Google says otherwise. When you get the negative Google review from whatever event you attended there, they not only hit you, the operator of the event, but they go for the building's throat too.
Yeah.
So now I have to be involved. And then beyond that, just the number of questions, inquiries, dialogue that's involved to book any type of event is 10 times what it is. Matt, you need a space for your business? Yes. How many square feet? Okay, great. How about this one? No. How about this one? No. How about this one? Yes. Okay, great. How long's the lease? Yes. Okay. Well, let me see your financials. Fine. You're in, you're out. You want to fit out? Sure. What do you need? Fine.
Right.
If you're having a first birthday party for your child, the thread of emails and what time can I get in and what about this and what about that is just, it goes on and on and on. And I'm not criticizing it. I just wasn't aware. And we were trying to use our leasing guy to do our events.
Different person.
And then he stopped leasing stuff. And we're like, well, why aren't you leasing anything? He says, because I'm planning, Joey's first birthday party.
Right.
He became a party planner, even though he wasn't planning it. He was helping pull the pieces of the puzzle together. And we had to have preferred vendors. So now we have an events guy, and then you're always reinventing.
Separate P&L, probably. I mean, you've got
separate business. Yeah. And same with the events and I'm sorry, the co-working and the office spaces. So it's really a few businesses under one roof that's turned into this conglomerate that again, you try to stay fresh and you try to stay new and in competition with all the neighborhood, because one of the byproducts of a burgeoning neighborhood, obviously, is these apartments and condos that are being built up all around the periphery of our building. Some of them have first floor commercial spaces that you're in direct competition. I remember the guy behind us, our architect for our building bought a plot of land directly behind us and built like a 16 or 17 unit apartment building. And the first floor was commercial. And it was sat vacant for years, brand new space, to the point where the owners who bought it from our architect contacted me and wanted to give me a preferred lease. And I was going to use it as overflow space or maybe make an amenity to our building, like a gym for free for tenants. And he needed some other services from me, real estate related, but we were never able to make a deal. And he just finally rented it. But they were in direct competition with our space. And I'm always, coming across ads and other places that are close by us that are similar to us. But now we have this gravitas and this momentum. And,
momentum.
And,
for sure.
and it's just been an amazing experience. And I can't take all the credit for it. I'm no brain surgeon. I'm no rocket scientist.
You're an engineer, a civil engineer, almost.
Not even. I did, 29 frat parties and 3 semesters at Drexel. I'm not really an engineer of any sort, other than if I engineered anything, I engineered the group of people and the resources to get the building done through, again, tenacity, hard work, and just repetitive going back and forth and making sure that all the pieces of the puzzle, fit into place, although they, at first blush they didn't, and we had to reinvent and change and move and be flexible. And again, I credit it all to the team. And if I want to pat myself on the back more than anything, again, I inherited the building. So let's not make me out to be some pioneer who had, the ability to cobble together the financing. We got the building, although it was struggling financially and it took hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars to get it together. I did inherit it. And I found the right people. That's what I did.
Right.
And I still work, on a daily basis to fight the good fight and to keep pushing the building forward. And I think I do that well too.
Yeah, I think you do also. Of course, I think I've heard other versions of the story where you go a little bit further into what you had to do. You inherited it, but you also had to grab it by both hands and yank it out of, not only physically, the building and its condition and what it was, but financially, and the condition it was financially. And there was some family intertwining that was involved there with your father. So it wasn't just, hey, I inherited the building. I mean, there's stories out there, hey, I inherited a building. There's a million of those stories. This isn't quite that story, and it's become, not to speak for you, but it's become a center point of your career, kind of, right? This thing is like in the middle. This is the centerpiece.
I've never done anything that people said, that's the Billy Penn guy, or this, it was something so notable that they attributed me to the building. And again, the fact that, there were millions of dollars worth of problems with the building between buying out partners and fixing title issues and solving the estate issues that got me the building. So it wasn't a cakewalk by any stretch, but I did what I could and I put it together and I kept pushing. So, and I had the resources and I knew the people from my speculation business in real estate.
From doing it for 20 years, being out there in the world, sheriff sales, buying lots, and you grow the thing. And it takes 20 years to have the group of people together that that you can contact and get in front of and make a thing like this happen. Right.
Yeah, I have a million real estate stories. Right. This is just one that went on for a long time. It was such a big project that, it's notable and people take notice. And a lot of people will come to the building. Like we'll have a family function for my stepdaughter had a baby shower. Mm-hmm. And I remember a bunch of her friends came, obviously, and their mothers who knew me from other family functions. And you own the building? I said, yeah, I'm one of the owners of the building. This building? Right. Yeah, because it doesn't define me to me. It's just a thing, but it's been a life's endeavor. Like you said, it's turned out to be a great thing. But it's not like, I'm that guy. I'm just a guy who happened to do the right thing again and again. And a lot of people, even clients, come to me and it's after hours and you have the key to the front door. I'm like, yeah, and I don't know whether it's kind of a double-edged sword. Like some people, when they think that you have something to do with the ownership of the building, it may relate to, well, he doesn't need my money for this $800 North Philly rental. because he has this building.
Right.
But no, that $800 North Philly rental is the wheelhouse and the bread and butter that springboarded me to this. And I still have that. And I still go there and I change the smoke detector battery if I have to.
Yeah.
You know, and have boots on the ground if I need to be, and spend a lot of time in a lot of my buildings. I just shoveled, 10 buildings out of the last snowfall because it wasn't a lot of snow, and I have all the tools and the equipment, and it was my, ability to see the properties and see my tenants, and they know that I care, and it all relates. And I use that same methodology with Billy Penn.
Yeah, no, for sure. And you can feel it. I can tell, and it pays. It makes it work. So good. Thank you for telling the story. You're going to come back, and look what it got you. All that, it got you famous. Now you're on podcast.
Got me friends with Matt. Look at that.
And you're going to come back, and you're going to tell other stories at some point soon, because I know you got some crazy stories. You bought some crazy other things out there.
Yep.
From people, and there's great deal stories out in real estate. I know you got a bunch of them, so we'll talk about some of those soon. Thanks for sharing this with me.
I look forward to it, and thanks again for having me. I'm glad to be here on the inaugural, and